Have you ever felt like your heart was holding the weight of the world, yet no one noticed? Have you given so much, forgiven so often, and carried so many storms that you've forgotten what it feels like to just breathe for yourself? Today, we're diving into a truth that many empaths live but few speak aloud, the moment when someone who has always cared so deeply decides finally to stop, not out of anger, not out of cruelty, but to reclaim themselves. Stay with me, because this is the story of strength, awakening, and the power of loving yourself first. The empath's breaking point is not a loud moment. It's not a slammed door, a heated argument, or a dramatic declaration of "I'm done." It is quiet, almost eerily quiet. It's the moment when a heart that has given endlessly, poured compassion into wounds it didn't cause, held space for emotions it didn't create, and carried burdens it never asked for, finally reaches its natural limit. This breaking point is not born from bitterness, it is born from depletion. Empaths don't stop caring because they stop loving. They stop because they realize they've been loving in a way that costs them their own well-being. For years, the empath may believe that endurance is kindness, staying when they're exhausted, understanding when they're hurting, forgiving when they're still wounded. They stretch themselves so thin for others that they mistake self-abandonment for generosity. But eventually, a moment arrives when even their gentle spirit whispers, "Enough." That whisper is the breaking point. It's the realization that they cannot continue giving in a way that empties them entirely. The breaking point often comes after a pattern of being taken for granted, when their efforts go unnoticed, their sacrifices unappreciated, and their loyalty assumed rather than valued. It's the moment they see clearly that their role has slowly shifted from a person to a resource, from a heart to a convenience. And when that truth hits, the empath awakens to something life-changing. Caring without boundaries is not compassion, it is self-destruction. So the empath's breaking point is not the end of their kindness. It is the beginning of self-respect. It's the turning point where they decide that their heart deserves the same tenderness they've spent years giving to others. It is a quiet, powerful rebirth, one that changes everything. The silent strength of the empath is one of the most misunderstood forms of power. People often assume that because an empath feels deeply, they must be fragile. But the truth is the opposite. There is a remarkable resilience in someone who can absorb the emotions of others, navigate tension without adding to it, and remain compassionate even in the presence of pain. Empaths carry an inner endurance that most people never fully see because their strength rarely shows up as force, it shows up as presence. While others may react impulsively or protect themselves through emotional distance, an empath steps forward with a steady heart. They listen when it's inconvenient, they understand when it's difficult, and they support others even when their own life feels heavy. They are the ones who hold the emotional atmosphere together in families, friendships, and workplaces, often without anyone recognizing the weight of what they're doing. Their strength is quiet not because it is small, but because it is controlled, intentional, and rooted in love. This silent strength is also the reason empaths appear calm even when they're absorbing emotional turbulence around them. They have the ability to stand steady in storms that would overwhelm most people. They connect deeply, care sincerely, and love fearlessly, which requires far more courage than shutting down or attacking ever could. Yet because their power is gentle, people often underestimate it. They mistake kindness for passivity, compassion for weakness, and understanding for the inability to walk away. But an empath's strength is not in how much they endure. It's in how much they continue to give while staying true to who they are. It's a power that doesn't need to shout to be felt. It moves quietly, transforms lives quietly, and changes the world in ways noise never could. The burden of always being the healer is a weight most empaths carry without ever admitting it. From a young age, they become the emotional anchor for the people around them, the friend who listens, the sibling who mediates, the partner who comforts, the coworker who steadies the atmosphere. It seems natural to them, almost instinctive, to patch emotional wounds and offer understanding where others might offer judgment. But what appears effortless from the outside is often quietly exhausting on the inside. Being the healer means they are constantly tuned in to the feelings of others. They sense tension before words confirm it. They notice subtle shifts in tone, body language, and energy that most people overlook. They step into comfort, soothe, or resolve because their heart can't stand to watch someone suffer. The problem is that this role becomes expected. Over time, people turn to them not just for support, but for rescue. Their compassion becomes a service, their empathy a tool, their presence a solution for everyone else's discomfort. What makes the burden heavier is that empaths rarely ask for the same care in return. They often feel guilty expressing their pain or seeking support, worrying that they might burden others the way others burden them. So they stay strong, stay available, stay giving, until the emotional weight becomes too much to hold. And in moments when they themselves need healing, they often find there is no one who provides the same depth of understanding they've always given. The imbalance becomes painfully clear. That's when the burden reveals its true cost. Healing everyone else can leave the healer deeply wounded. This keynote is a reminder that empaths are not endless wells. The heart that repairs others also needs rest, nourishment, and someone who can hold space for them with the same tenderness they've offered the world. Self-abandonment disguised as kindness is one of the most dangerous patterns an empath can fall into because it hides behind good intentions. On the surface, it looks like compassion, staying a little longer, giving a little more, understanding a little deeper. But beneath that surface lies a slow erosion of the self. Empaths often convince themselves that putting others first is simply who they are, that being endlessly patient and supportive is an act of love. Yet slowly, almost invisibly, they begin to sacrifice their own needs, their own voice, and their own boundaries for the sake of keeping the peace or making someone else feel whole. What makes this pattern so deceptive is that it feels noble. The empath believes they're doing the right thing by absorbing discomfort, avoiding conflict, or forgiving too quickly. They tell themselves, "It's okay, I can handle it," even when their heart is cracking under the weight of unspoken pain. They give pieces of themselves away so subtly that they don't realize they're disappearing until they feel empty, drained, or resentful. Over time, this self-abandonment becomes a habit. They say yes when they want to say no. They accept behavior that hurts them. They downplay their needs because acknowledging them feels selfish. But real kindness is not supposed to cost someone their self-worth. Compassion should not require self-destruction. The truth is, when an empath keeps choosing others over themselves, they teach people how to treat them. They unintentionally show the world that their feelings are negotiable, their needs are secondary, and their boundaries are optional. This is where the damage begins, not just in their relationships, but within their own spirit. This keynote is a call to recognize that love must flow in both directions. Kindness is powerful, but only when it includes the self. Self-respect is not selfish. It is the anchor that keeps empathy from turning into self-erasure. The awakening is the moment an empath finally sees the truth they've been avoiding for years, that saving everyone else is slowly destroying them. It doesn't arrive in a dramatic burst. It appears in quiet clarity, often after one too many disappointments, one too many ignored boundaries, or one too many nights spent comforting others while feeling alone in their own pain. It's the moment they realize that their capacity to care has been stretched beyond its limit, and that something inside them has shifted from tired to awakened. This awakening is not fueled by anger, it's fueled by recognition. The empath begins to notice patterns they once excused, the relationships where they give endlessly and receive the bare minimum, the people who only appear during crisis, the emotional debts that are never repaid. They finally understand that their heart has been operating on the belief that love means sacrifice, when in reality, love should never demand the abandonment of self. During this awakening, the empath starts to ask new questions. Why am I the one who always has to be strong? Why does my compassion feel like a responsibility? Why am I healing others while silently falling apart? These questions aren't born from weakness. They're born from self-awareness, the first sign that the empath is reclaiming their power. And though the awakening can feel painful, it is also liberating. It marks the beginning of boundaries, the rediscovery of personal identity, and the realization that they are worthy of the same depth of care they give so freely. The empath begins to understand that they cannot carry everyone, nor should they. This keynote represents the shift from unconscious overgiving to conscious self-preservation. It is the moment the empath chooses not to harden their heart, but to protect it, an essential turning point that leads them back to balance, respect, and emotional freedom. The shift from people-pleasing to people-teaching is one of the most transformative chapters in an empath's journey. For much of their life, empaths often equate harmony with sacrifice. They smooth over conflicts, say yes when they mean no, and stay agreeable to avoid hurting anyone's feelings. People-pleasing becomes a reflex, a learned survival skill that makes others comfortable but slowly wears down the empath's own sense of self. But eventually, a moment comes when they realize that constantly accommodating others only reinforces unhealthy patterns, both for themselves and for the people around them. This is where the shift begins. Instead of trying to keep everyone happy, the empath starts showing others how to treat them, with respect, boundaries, and accountability. They stop cushioning the emotional consequences of other people's actions. They stop rescuing people from lessons they need to learn. Their yes becomes intentional, and their no becomes a complete sentence. It's not about becoming harsh or distant. It's about choosing self-respect over self-sacrifice. People who were accustomed to the old version of the empath may resist this change at first. They might call them cold, distant, or unrecognizable, but what's really happening is that the empath is teaching, not through lectures, but through behavior. They teach others that kindness does not mean unlimited access, that compassion does not mean self-erasure, and that love without boundaries is not healthy love at all. This shift empowers the empath to step into a new form of leadership, one rooted in truth rather than compliance. By modeling healthy boundaries, they show others how to be responsible for their own emotions, and in doing so, they create deeper, more respectful, and more balanced relationships. This transformation is not the loss of their gentle nature, it is the evolution of it. When an empath finally steps back, the consequences ripple through the lives of those who took their presence for granted. For years, the empath may have been the emotional foundation, steady, understanding, forgiving, always available. People grow comfortable with that kind of support. They assume it will always be there, that the empath will always answer, always absorb, always mend. But when the empath reaches their limit and pulls away, it creates a quiet but unmistakable void that others feel immediately. Those who relied on the empath's endless compassion begin to realize how much they depended on it. They notice the absence of patient listening, the lack of gentle reassurance, the silence where emotional comfort used to be. The empath's departure highlights everything the empath used to give: attention, stability, peace, and for the first time, others see just how much of the emotional labor was never mutual. Some people react with confusion, wondering why the empath has changed. Others react with frustration, upset that the effortless support they once enjoyed is no longer guaranteed. But beneath all of that is a deeper truth. The empath's withdrawal exposes dynamics that were unbalanced from the beginning. When the source of unconditional care is gone, people are forced to confront their own emotional responsibilities, the ones they used to hand over to the empath without a second thought. And for those who genuinely valued the empath, the absence becomes a lesson in appreciation. They begin to understand that kindness is not an infinite resource, that compassion has limits, and that every heart deserves reciprocity. The consequences are not meant to punish, they are a natural correction. When the empath stops giving beyond their capacity, people are finally confronted with what they overlooked, what they assumed, and what they failed to nurture. In that way, the empath's silence becomes the most powerful teacher of all. The empath's rebirth is the moment they begin to rebuild themselves, not as the world needed them to be, but as they truly are. After years of overextending, absorbing pain that wasn't theirs, and dimming their own needs to illuminate others, something inside finally shifts. This rebirth is not dramatic. It is steady, intentional, and deeply personal. It begins when the empath decides that their well-being is no longer optional. For the first time in a long time, they start choosing themselves with the same dedication they once offered everyone else. This transformation is quiet but powerful. The empath begins to rediscover parts of themselves that were buried beneath responsibility and emotional exhaustion, dreams they postponed, desires they silenced, boundaries they never allowed to exist. They start noticing what genuinely brings them peace and what steals their energy. They relearn how to sit with their own feelings instead of constantly tending to the feelings of others. During this rebirth, the empath becomes more balanced. They stop carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to them. They stop volunteering to be the hero. They realize they can care without rescuing, love without losing themselves, and empathize without depleting their inner resources. Instead of offering their entire heart to people who only offer fragments, they begin demanding reciprocity, respect, and honesty. This rebirth also marks the return of their inner strength, the kind that isn't drained by overgiving. They feel lighter, clearer, and more grounded. Relationships become healthier because the empath no longer hides their needs or accepts emotional imbalance. Ultimately, the empath's rebirth is a return home to themselves. It is a reminder that their heart is not a bottomless well, but a living, breathing part of them that deserves care, rest, and protection. This new beginning doesn't make them colder, it makes them whole. Self-love as a revolutionary act is a powerful turning point in an empath's life. Because for someone who has spent years caring for everyone else, choosing themselves is not a habit, it is a rebellion. Empaths are conditioned, often from childhood, to prioritize others' comfort above their own. They learn to be the peacemaker, the listener, the caretaker, and eventually they begin to believe that their worth is tied to how much they can give. But when an empath finally decides to love themselves with the same depth they offer others, everything changes. Self-love becomes revolutionary because it interrupts a lifelong pattern of emotional self-neglect. It challenges the belief that their needs are secondary and asserts the truth that their well-being matters just as much as anyone else's. Instead of pouring all their energy outward, the empath begins redirecting some of it inward, resting without guilt, setting boundaries without apologizing, and speaking up without fear of disappointing others. These small acts may seem ordinary from the outside, but for an empath, they are acts of courage. With self-love comes clarity. They start to see which relationships nurture them and which relationships drain them. They begin to value their own time, their own emotions, and their own dreams. They stop giving from a place of exhaustion and start giving from a place of fullness, which makes their empathy healthier, stronger, and more sustainable. Self-love also teaches the empath a profound truth. They are responsible for protecting their own heart. No one else can do that for them. By choosing themselves, they break the cycle of overgiving and invite balance into their relationships. They no longer chase validation because they have learned to validate themselves. In this way, self-love becomes more than a practice. It becomes freedom. It is the moment the empath realizes they deserve the same tenderness, respect, and devotion they have always offered to the world. The message to the world when an empath stops caring is profound, often misunderstood, and deeply transformative. Many see it as cruelty or indifference, but in reality, it is a declaration of self-preservation and a call for respect. For years, empaths give without limits, offer understanding without conditions, and absorb pain that isn't theirs to bear. People grow accustomed to this generosity and take it for granted, forgetting that empathy has boundaries and that even the most patient heart has limits. When the empath finally steps back, it sends a message louder than any words. Their compassion is not infinite, and their presence is not a guarantee. This act challenges the world to recognize the value of emotional labor that has long been invisible. It teaches others that relationships must be reciprocal, that kindness must be respected, and that care without boundaries is unsustainable. The absence of the empath's overgiving forces people to confront their own responsibilities, to notice what they have overlooked, and to appreciate what they once assumed would always be there. In this way, the world learns accountability and gratitude, not through lectures, but through the natural consequence of the empath reclaiming their heart. At the same time, the message is deeply human. Stepping back is not about becoming hard or uncaring. It is about reclaiming balance and protecting the soul. It is a reminder that empathy should be a bridge, not a cage, and that self-respect is a prerequisite for true compassion. For empaths, stopping in this way is a revolutionary act of self-love, resilience, and wisdom. For the world, it is a moment of awakening, a chance to reflect on how they treat those who give endlessly. When an empath stops caring, it is not the end of kindness. It is a recalibration, a powerful lesson that compassion is most meaningful when it is conscious, reciprocal, and rooted in respect. So what happens when an empath finally stops caring? They don't become cold. They become whole. They stop giving until they're empty and start loving themselves fiercely. They teach the world that boundaries are strength, that respect is earned, and that true compassion begins with balance. And in that quiet shift, they become unstoppable, not because they care less, but because they care smarter. If you've ever given too much, stayed too long, or silenced your own needs for others, let this be your reminder. Your heart matters, your peace matters, and your life deserves the same devotion you've always given.